Down there? Oh, wow. I saw a hand raised over there from Phil. He's got lots of energy back there, but everyone else... Right, it is all about the coffee. We've got a little while before the next coffee break. Hope you can hang in there. As mentioned, we've got Martin Splitt, Webmaster Trends Analyst at Google. He's going to be talking technical SEO. So please join me in welcoming him to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, excellent. With all the fantastic talks so far, I'm really like, oh, is it going to be too basic, too boring? I don't think so, because I have a bunch of stuff that I know that people get wrong quite often because it's not quite obvious or easy. So let's get into this right for Technical SEO 101 for web developers. So I'm not necessarily looking like you might know me from Twitter or other conferences. I'm not wearing a weird hat or a onesie for once. I make up for that by being very, very jet-lagged, so I guess that helps maybe. But basically, generally speaking, I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst. Not many people get where that's going. It's basically just a really weird internal way of saying developer advocate for search. And I'm doing this for not really the search team, I'm doing it for the web ecosystem team. So we are basically working most with the search teams and Google Search, and we are helping you to be successful in search, but I'm primarily interested in making sure that you can succeed on the web, that your businesses, your websites can succeed on the web, because I think the web platform is a fantastic platform to work on, rather than any of the more closed ones. So I'm here for pretty much all things web, and I work for the Google, you know, this smart startup from Mountain View. I like to start the talk by basically figuring out what you know about SEO and giving you my view of what SEO should be and how it can be done. Not to say that that's the only way to do it or that's necessarily the only right way to do it. It's just like the way that I see it being done, giving the most bang for the buck, really. Then we're going to go quickly about how Google Search works, which is basically how every search engine works, except for that I know the technical details of ours. I don't really know the ones from the competitors for some weird reason. And last but not least, well, not really last, but basically then we're going to dive into the interesting bits, which is what are the common challenges that people keep running into? And a bunch of these are coming from personal experience and lots of conversations with other web developers. I'm a web developer myself. I have made so many mistakes when it comes to SEO and search engine optimization that you will not like, you won't believe the kind of stuff that I did sometimes. But yeah, I'll try to keep you from making the same mistakes, because making the same mistakes multiple times is boring. I want you to make new, more exciting mistakes so that I have something to look into and debug. And last but not least, because I only have like 30 minutes-ish, I want to leave you with a bunch of resources and tools that you can use and bring back to your teams and bring back to the SEOs that you work with in order to help you be successful in a more sustainable way. Right, so what is this SEO thing? Who here has heard the term? Who here knows what it is? That's more or less the same crowd. A few people are like, I don't know. And I understand that. It's perfectly fine, because it's one of these things where you think you know what it is, and then you look closer and you're like, oh, hold on. I didn't know that. Because actually SEO is quite broad. It's quite a big, complex thing, and not everyone that is an SEO and SEO expert does all the different things. So what is SEO really? So search engine optimization basically starts with the content, right? SEO should work with the marketing and sales departments to figure out what the hell is it that we're doing and how do we put this in the right words, right? Because if my product is called, I don't know, Toasty McToaster Face, then you probably can guess what it is. If it is called the Hot Bread 10,000, then you're like, is that a toaster? I don't know. Is that a microwave? What is this? So SEOs will work with marketing and sales departments to figure out what words you should be using, what words are people using when they talk about your product, and what kind of questions do they come with that you need to answer within your website to help them make the right decisions. Which brings us to the second part, which is strategy. And it should also work with the business side again, more with the C-levels maybe, to figure out what is it that we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to sell a product? Are we trying to make them subscribe to a service? Are we trying to make them subscribe for an e-learning course? What is it what we're trying to accomplish, and what is it that the customer is trying to accomplish, and how can we align these two things? Because sometimes these two things are not the same thing, right? Sometimes you just want to buy, I don't know, a fridge, and then people are like, oh, a fridge enthusiast, I see. I have the right community for you. And I'm like, no, I just need a fridge to keep my food cold and fresh. Like, what the hell? So that's the other side. But we're developers. This is a developer conference, so why would I care about SEO as a web developer? Because there's also the technology side, and this is where it gets interesting for us, right? SEOs should also work with us, and we should work with the SEOs to figure out what are the technical steps that we need to take into account to make sure that computers understand what we're doing. Because writing something for humans is hard, but writing something so that computers understand it is even harder. We know that as developers, right? Undefined is not a function, but that's not what I meant. So this boils down to we are having to make sure that we have an API that we do not really have control over work with our stuff, right? So this is a requirement that we need to factor in when designing our solutions, and that's a relatively tricky one because unlike other APIs, the documentation for search engines is not as in-depth, and we don't really have a sandbox environment to try it out, right? I can't just install Google Search on my MacBook and then run it and see like, oh, I can make this part of my CI by putting it into a Docker container. It's not working like that. So it's a particularly tricky API to get right to work with. So before we go into the technical details, I just want to drive this point home that technology is just one aspect of search engine optimization, and it's maybe not the most important one. It is an important one, it's just not the most important one. I'm German, and if you heard to the talk earlier, or listened to the talk earlier, then you know that breakfast in Germany is a big thing, and I grew up with breakfast being the most important meal of the day. I skipped it today. I feel terrible about it. I feel like I betrayed my country. Well, I immigrated to Switzerland for a reason, right? Anyhow, so toast is an integral part of my breakfast usually. And my toaster broke, so I need a new toaster. So what do? Being the millennial that doesn't want to talk to humans, which is fantastic being a speaker here. Basically, I go to my search engine of favor and basically just start searching for toasters. And then I might end up on this page. Now, what is this page giving me? Well, the most prominent element is the image, and it looks more or less like a toaster. I'm more or less sure that this is a toaster. But when I look for reassurance in the next most prominent element, which is the text here, it's like smart, simple, beautiful. The hell does that mean? This could be a car, this could be a phone, this could be a watch, this could be pretty much anything. So this doesn't really help me. And then it's like, oh, we're going to disrupt your breakfast. I want peace and quiet. I don't want my breakfast disrupted. What the hell? So please don't do that. And then it's like thermochemical food processing. Are you cooking the bread? What is this? You're toasting it? Are you cooking it? Are you microwaving it? Are you deep frying it? Ooh, deep fried bread, that sounds tasty. Not very good for my figure probably, but whatever. And it's the best invention since sliced bread. So this page is not really exactly helpful. But then we can maybe cheat by looking at the navigation, which is probably condensed of what this is about, right? So we have the home link. We also have a philosophy, and we have the hot bread X10. I don't even know what the hot bread is, so why would I click on the hot bread X10? I still don't know what this is. And then the call to action. The primary call to action is join the movement. I'm happy with my religion, thank you very much. I'd rather not join a cult. I might found one day. I highly encourage you to follow me on Twitter to find out when that happens. But it's probably going to be like the cult of funny hats or something, so definitely worth joining. But what is this abomination? And now you're all laughing, but I'm pretty sure if you've ever looked at a marketing page from a company that you used to work for or that you're still working for, you will find pages like this. Because it looks so shiny and fancy, and ooh, look at all those words, and I guess a bunch of people might have gotten a promotion over the specific shade of color for the CTA, I don't know. This happens. Design by committee makes this happen, or disregard for good copywriting makes this happen. and it's not particularly good. And the easiest optimization you can do is not technical. This might be like a really fancy framework. It might use like server-side rendering to be really fast with like rehydration to make it really nice and responsive. It might load within like a second. It might be a PWA, but the content is not good. The easiest and most low-hanging fruit, more or less, would be to change the copywriting. Now, that's not really a low-hanging fruit because good copywriting is actually hard, and I highly recommend you pay someone to do it who knows what they're doing. Because then you might end up with something like this, right? Isn't this much nicer? The fastest toaster. Bam! This is a toaster. It's the fastest one. I like that. You've got my attention there. Never burn your toast again. Woo! All right, that sounds like a peaceful and lovely breakfast. And it gets me my toast faster. Well, yeah, driving the point home here, I get it. And you should try it. OK, cool. But I'm a German, so I overanalyze everything, and I get analysis paralysis. Because honestly, I haven't had to buy toasters that often in my life. Actually, this is the first time I'm buying one. I basically just moved out with an extra toaster that we had lying around. So, and this one served me like 20 years-ish. I mean, it served my parents, and now it served me. But now I need to buy a new one, but I don't feel like I'm ready. This is a really important commitment. I got married, whatever, but I have to buy a toaster now. This is where it's at, isn't it? So what can I do? Well, what I can do is I can click here on how to choose a toaster. That is amazing. This might help me figure out what I need. And maybe I figure out that the hot bread, or the toaster make toaster face is not the right thing. But conveniently, they also supply me with an Our Toasters link. So I can check out the other toasters that they have on offer. So maybe the other option is a better option for me. And once I found the option that I need, I can just click on Buy a Toaster and be done with it. Nice. Same technology, same product, very different content. This goes to say, if you do SEO without a good content and strategy level, then you're going to get chocolate ice cream emoji. It's not going to take you that far. OK, but now let's go into the technical bits and pieces. So let's start with how does my website actually get into search engines, right? Well, it all starts off with some HTML, right? And then the crawler gets that HTML and understands what the page is about. So what is this page about? Oh, yeah, JavaScript. That's unclear, isn't it? So is that a problem for search engines? Well, let's see. So search engines start by having basically a list of URLs that they want to get into their search index. They want to find these and basically figure out what they are about, and then show them to users who are looking for the content that they are about. It starts by basically taking a URL from that list and making an HTTP request. The thing that does this HTTP request is the crawler. It's basically, if you ever used curl or something like that, that's what it is. It just makes an HTTP request, gets the response back. In reality, it's a lot more complex than that, but for our understanding, that suffices perfectly. It just makes an HTTP request. It gets some response back, like the response from the previous slide, right, with some HTML that just loads a bunch of JavaScript. And then it processes it. Now assume that this is a proper, static, old website. Then it has a bunch of content in there. And then we can actually start doing something. And the very first thing we want to do is we want to index as many websites and pages as possible, right? Because if we only have like the home page of every website, then that might not be really helpful. If we look at our toaster example, we had a bunch of pages with very different content, right? How to choose a toaster, the different toasters available, the home page. Maybe there's like something specific in the shop. If I click on buy, I might get discounts or something. Who knows? We want to get all of these pages into our search engine so that you can find them. So the very first thing we do is we look through the HTML. And the HTML is semantic if it's done right. If the only HTML element you're using is div, you're not doing it right. OK? So a semantic HTML has some links in it, for instance. And these links link to URLs. So what we can do is we can basically parse the HTML for links and then get the URLs and put them back into the crawl queue so that the next instance of the crawler can start doing the same process as we are building up here for the other URLs that we discovered. And that way, we basically crawl through the internet. We crawl through the web, finding page after page of your website, and then other websites that you link to as well. However, as we've seen, that isn't necessarily sufficient. The website that I showed you does not have any links and doesn't have much other HTML content for that matter either. So what we can do instead is we basically just have to execute JavaScript. Now, as it turns out, there aren't infinite computing resources. I know, the age of cloud. How dare you say that there's not infinite computing resources? The cloud is someone else's computer fundamentally, so deal with it. There's only so many that you can use. So we basically crawl the HTML, we bundle it up, we put it into a queue, and then after that, we basically wait for our cloud infrastructure to be available to do another step in the process, and that's called rendering. Our renderer is called Web Rendering Service. It's basically a component that takes that HTML from the queue and opens a headless browser with it. And then does like the HTML loads some JavaScript, so we make these requests, and then we pull in whatever happens. We execute the JavaScript that might load more images and context and make some API calls, whatever. We run the JavaScript as if you were in a regular browser. It's just a headless browser in our cloud infrastructure. And then once we're done rendering, we pass that back into processing. So now we should have the full HTML of your website, even if it's a client-side rendered single-page application or a client-side rendered JavaScript application. We should have the HTML content ready, and now we can, again, look for links in there. But now that we are sure that we have the full content, we can also try to understand what this is about. And that means that we are looking at headlines, at image tags, at video tags, at all the stuff, all the text that you have on your website to figure out what is this website about. OK, toasters. OK, great, fantastic. The fastest toaster. OK, cool. Because basically, we have to build up a map, like a library, right? If you go into a library, you just don't start by the first book and going like, no, that's not what I wanted. No, that's not either. You're looking into an index. You're looking like, OK, toasters. That's the books on toasters. This one sounds from the title like it might be interesting to what I'm trying to accomplish. So then you can go to that specific book in the library directly. That's what a search engine does for you. It's basically a digital librarian, as Miriam Yessier once said that. And what we're doing then is basically we put them all into a database and figure out what these pages are about, and then that's it from our side so far. But when you type in a query, you might have very different queries, right? Cheapest toaster, fastest toaster, toaster comparison, best toaster 2019. Cat images on toasters, I don't know. Do not toast your cats, please. So we have to figure out like which of the things that we have in the index are the best result for your specific query. How do we do that? Well, we rank them. So we have a list of things that are potentially interesting for toasters, but your query intention is the fastest toaster. So we'll find all the pages that are about the fastest toaster, and then we need to still figure out like which one is the best one for you. Is it the fastest page? Is it the page that was most recently updated? We have many, many, many factors to figure this one out, and you don't really have control over this, right? If you make a fantastic website, you might be on the first spot for one specific query, and then you change the query and you're not showing up as much, and that's OK. If your website is about the fastest toaster and I'm looking for cat images, then why would you show up on position 1? That makes no sense. And even if I'm looking for the cheapest toaster and yours isn't cheap, then that may be not a good thing to be ranking on the first position for, because the user's going to click on it and go like, what? That's expensive, and going back. That's not good for us because people are like, ooh, Google is not as good. And it's not good for you because you basically just had traffic that meant nothing, right? So ranking is a tricky one. It's a can of worms that I would rather not open today. So we're just going to ignore it because I want you to take away what you have the most influence over, and that is crawling, rendering, and indexing. These are the 3 things that are in your control, and there's plenty that can go wrong there. All right, so one thing that I want to mention is, so we have seen 2 things, right? We had a crawler and a renderer, and both of these are basically browsers that are doing HTTP requests, and the other one executes the JavaScript and whatnot. You will probably meet some people who are like, oh yeah, but it's like Chrome 41. That was true until May this year. But now we are running an evergreen Chrome version. So the Chrome version that you have on your desktop, as long as it's a stable version, is pretty much the version that we are running within Googlebot. So new JavaScript features are available, and we update it within a couple of weeks after each stable release. If you want to learn more about that, then there's a blog post that helps you figure out more details on this. Also, a few people might claim that our tools are not updated. That's also not true. Our tools have updated as well. There's a blog post on the Google Webmaster blog that explains what that means in detail. However, if you look into your log files, you might still see this. And it says there 41, Chrome 41. That's because a bunch of websites literally just break for Google search when you would change the user agent. We told them in May, we told them again like a month ago, we will tell them again in a couple of months, we will tell them one more time, and then eventually we're going to update the user agent. But for now, it's Chrome 41 in the user agent, but that's actually the latest Chrome. Right now, we're running Chrome 76 or 77, I'm not sure. I think it's 76. So don't worry about that. If you see it in your logs, that's not a problem. So that means that my web application that looks like this is fine in Google search. Because we run the JavaScript, unless something goes wrong, you'll be indexed and everything will be fine. Talk over, thank you very much for attending. No, there's more to this, right? Because sometimes you make mistakes, or you leave something on the table, some potential to be left on the table. And one thing that I keep seeing, especially when you use the JavaScript framework, is that people are not getting the best out of their websites by even just the simplest thing, which is meta descriptions and titles. So if I'm looking for a cupcake recipe, then these search results are not fantastic, right? They're not that great, actually, because they all say, like, Barbara's baking blog. Yeah, thank you very much. Which one is the cupcake recipe? Or what are the different, if these are all cupcake recipes, what's the difference between them? If they all have the same description snippet and the same title, that's not really helping me. So the easiest thing you can do is have specific titles and descriptions on your websites to tell the user this is what the page is about. Right? It's like a very simple trick. You can do that in your framework of choice. In React, I would highly recommend installing React Helmet. It allows you to use your props in the components to set the title and meta description. If you're not using React, that is totally fine. Angular has something built in called the title and meta services. You can use these to set the different tags on your page with component data. If you're using Vue, then you can use the Vue-meta package. Does the same thing. Again, it sets the title and meta description so that your search results are standing out a little more. Now, if you want to learn more about this like basic stuff, or if you want to share that with a coworker, I highly recommend checking out our YouTube videos. We have 8 episodes right now that explain like a bunch of fundamental concepts. We are filming more later this year, so definitely keep an eye on YouTube if you are interested in video content rather than written content. But things can go wrong. So I learned this summer, or last summer actually, I learned how to fly a paraglider, but this was not my best start. I'm just, the disappointment of my instructor is just beautiful. I can't use GIFs from the internet for legal reasons, so I'm just like using my own GIFs. So there you go, you're gonna have to put up with that. Do you know what mistake I make? It's such a tiny mistake. It happens now. What I do is, I hold my arms like this, which basically like starts breaking the glider, and the glider just keeps moving because of momentum and then goes whoop, instead of doing this. If I would have done this, I would have like lifted off and the glider would have carried me away, as it did before and afterwards. I love that my friend took only one video of the start, and that was this one. Thank you for that. But basically, it's small things that can sometimes go wrong and have quite an impact. And it's similar here. So sometimes you're like, well, Google search finds my home page, but doesn't find any of my other pages. And I can't believe that I have to ask that question, but like, how do you link your pages? And it's like 2019, but OK, let's have this conversation. That's a link. It's a very old HTML. It's an ancient HTML element that takes an href attribute that has a URL where you can go to. That's a good one. That we can extract. That one we find when we process your HTML, either after crawling or rendering. This is also fine. Still a link. Still has an href with a URL that we can go to, that we can enqueue. And it has some on-click handler. That's cool. Whatever. We don't care. That's not cool. This does not go anywhere, technically. It does something on click, but it's not really a link to somewhere. It's an empty link. So we're gonna skip it, because we can't really do much. And now we're like, all right, OK, how about this? Yeah, 50% there. Very good. You have an href. But if I put this URL into think of the crawl queue as basically like a Slack channel. And like people would take whatever I post into the Slack channel and run it in your browser. What they're going to see when they put in the hash? Not much interesting things, right? That's not great. Neither is this. Again, this is not a URL that we can put in the URL queue. So I'm sorry. No, that's not even a link. Rule of thumb. If it does something on the page, and can use a button, it's fine. If it takes you to different content, if it changes the content that the user is going to see fundamentally, that's a link. So a button, Googlebot does not click on buttons. Googlebot looks for URLs. This is a button. We're like, well, whatever. No. Bad. Bad web developer. You're having more typing effort with this, and you're getting less built-in features, and it's still not a link. Just don't. So let's just stick to links. And while I said links with URLs, let's look at URLs for a second. The first URL is a just very typical URL. It's a host. It's some server somewhere on the internet, serves some document. There we go. The second one does the same thing, but it has this hash and then some string after the hash, the fragment. The fragment is meant to address a specific part of the content. So I have a very long document on this page, on this URL, and then I want to go to a very specific part of it, to some element with the ID that I use in the fragment identifier here. For search engines, that doesn't matter, because we need the full document anyways. We basically just show you a URL, so it doesn't really make sense for us to index the different IDs separately. And that wasn't the problem until we, as web developers, came up with this idea to kinda use it differently. So what we're doing here is we get a JavaScript event whenever the fragment changes. So we can use like fetch or whatever to change the content that you're seeing. We felt bad about it. That's why we came up with a like hash bang. It's like, look, we know, but come on, right? Google tried to work around that issue by introducing Ajax crawling. It was really, really tricky to get that right for us developers. It was really, really hard to get that right for Google, so they deprecated it years ago. So do not rely on this to work. Instead, use the history API. The history API gives you the ability to have proper URLs and still maintain browser history cleanly. Browser support looks pretty good, so let's not hold up with that. And then sometimes you might think like, OK, so my links are fine, my URLs are fine, but it's still not really showing up in Google search. If you use our wonderful free search console, you might get this in the report. You might see like, oh, yeah, we discovered this. It's just not indexed yet. Most likely, that means it got stuck in crawling. So it's in the crawl queue. We just haven't crawled it yet. Why is that? Well, actually, it turns out that crawling is not that easy, because we have to make a trade-off. So servers have different capabilities, and we don't know these capabilities because servers do not necessarily tell us, and these things can change depending on how many people are accessing the website at the same time as Googlebot does. So we basically try to figure out how often or how many connections in parallel we can do, how many requests per second can we put on your server before it falls over. That's called crawl rate. The other thing is not every website needs to be crawled as often as other websites. So we try to figure out how often we should even schedule, even try to crawl pages. That's what we call crawl demand. Now, what's crawl rate? Well, look at it from this perspective. Our crawler makes an HTTP request, gets a response back. In this case, the server says, yeah, this is cool, all good. And it was pretty quick. So with 300 requests per second, we're probably doing fine. This should be OK. Your server is holding up. It's a really well-tuned server. Good job. Well done there. But if we increase that, your server starts responding relatively slowly. That's usually a sign that we should not increase it further. And normally, we are smart enough to do that. So to say like, ooh, the server starts being slow, so we're probably going to back off a little bit. 300 requests a second looked fine. These numbers are completely random. Like I pulled them out of thin air. Ignore the numbers. The point is, if your server gets slow after a certain amount of concurrent requests happening, then that means that we think that we hit what your server can deal with in terms of load. But let's just play a game of let's pretend we ignore that and we just go up. And your server goes like, oh, what is this? So that's not good. So if we see an error from your server, no matter what the response time is, if you see an error coming from your server, you're like, oh, OK, sorry for that. We'll just like chill out a little bit. The other thing is, how often do we need to crawl this page? If it's a page that is in high demand, like if I'm searching for the latest Marvel movie, then maybe the things that we have in the index for Marvel movies is maybe something that we want to, or DC or whatever, is probably something that we want to like increase crawling for a little bit. That's what usually happens when there's seasonality. If you're a retailer, you have certain points in the time, like Black Friday or Christmas or Easter, where the demand basically increases for things that you have in your shop, and we usually then start to update these pages a little more frequently. The other thing is, how fresh is the page? If you have a page on Jam, then maybe you're not updating it every couple of minutes. If you have a news portal, different story, you might update a little more frequently. If you want to learn more about how crawl budget works and how to optimize for it, I have this lovely article that explains more. It links to another article that explains on how to optimize your crawl budget as well. OK, so now let's talk a few scenarios. Let's say like I have a platform where you can rate dogs. There's a dog that is top dog, that is best rated right now, and then each of these dogs have their own profile. Now I have URLs like this. The first one is clearly one that might change quite quickly depending on how the ratings go. The other one is always going to be the same dog. It's always going to be Leica. It's their profile. But now, how do we know which one we should put into the index, right? If Leica is the most top-rated dog right now, then we're going to crawl both URLs and figure out, like, hold on, these are the same. So we have to basically make a decision. We can flip a coin and say, like, OK, we throw this one away or we throw that one away. That's not great. Luckily, you have the opportunity to tell us, no. The more stable one that always brings you to the content that is on this page, which is the dog Leica, is actually on this other URL. So you can tell us which one we should keep. Now, the thing is, sometimes you tell us wrong things. Sometimes we have good reasons not to pick what you are saying, and then we pick differently. But basically, you can signal to us what you think is the best URL for this content, and you should. That doesn't necessarily mean we do take it, and that's normally not a problem. So like canonicalization issues are quite tricky to trace down, but most of the times it's fine. As long as your content shows up under some URL, you'll probably be fine. Also, if you want something not being crawled, you can tell us. So the crawler does not just like make an HTTP request. It looks if you have a robots.txt on your server. If you do, we read it and parse it. If you tell Googlebot, do not take any URLs that are under private, then we're not gonna. However, if we find a link somewhere that links to something under private, we cannot crawl it. We don't understand what is under this link, but we have seen the URL. So for some times for some scenarios where we don't have much content, we might still show it in search results, but it's very unlikely. If you really want something to not show up in the index, please tell us so by either using the HTTP header xrobots tag and say no index, or you use a meta tag on your HTML pages that says no index. In that case, we will crawl it if it's not in robots.txt. Like if you have robots.txt on it, we're not going to see these two. So be a little careful which one to pick. But basically, if we see it, if we render it, we're going to look into it in processing again. And then if it says no index, we're not going to put it in the index. There's also a really nasty thing that happens specifically in single-page apps, which is soft errors. So if I go to a URL that doesn't exist, my server doesn't know about that. It will serve the index.html, it will load the JavaScript, the JavaScript does whatever it has to do, and then goes like, I don't know what this is. I have nothing for this URL, I'm sorry. The problem there is your server says, well, this is fine. This is cool. And once your server has spoken, you can't change that with JavaScript. So in this case, what you're saying is like, here is a good page. And then the page says, no, I'm not a good page. That's a bit weird, isn't it? So Googlebot isn't exactly happy when that happens. Normally, we detect this. We have detection for this kind of content. But sometimes your error page might look too much like a real page, and then we don't catch it. That's not what you want to happen, right? That doesn't look good if it happens in search results. We are working against that, but you can also help. One way of dealing with this is if, let's say here we make an API call for a specific ID. If we don't have a doc with that ID, we just redirect to a page where the server is configured to tell us 404 not found, in which case we get a 404. Like we get this page, we get redirected, we get a 404, we're like, OK, so this page redirects here, and that doesn't exist anymore, so the other page is invalid as well, so we're not going to index it. Alternatively, you can also have a meta robots tag somewhere that says index me, and then basically change that to no index as you find out that this page shouldn't be indexed. We're going to execute the JavaScript. We're going to see the no index. We're not going to index it. Some people, and that's me, really, I did this. I had a meta name robots on my page, and I had it set to no index. And then only when I knew that I had the content, I switched it. I'm like, I'm saving some lines of code because I don't have to actually deal with the fact that there might be an error. It's not going to end up in the Google search index anyways. Is that a good idea? It's not. Why is it not a good idea? Well, because in the pipeline, what happens is we look at the HTML, right? So from the crawler, we get the raw HTML that has a no index. Processing looks at it and goes like, oh, no index. In that case, I'm done here. It doesn't want to be in the index. But JavaScript is only run down here. So the problem there is we can't really see your change in JavaScript. So that means that all your pages are now out of the index. Not very good. Also, we don't persist data. So if you require cookies or local storage or session storage or IndexedDB to make your website work, we don't do that. Every single URL that comes from the queue is basically run as if nothing else has ever happened before in that browser. There's a bunch of other APIs that can be surprising or like not as straightforward as you'd think. If you want to learn more about that, we have a troubleshooter guide that lists a bunch of these gotchas. If you encounter other problems in the wild that we haven't covered there, please let us know. We are happily extending this guide. It's a pretty new guide, actually. And not all crawlers do support JavaScript. Google Search does. Other crawlers might not. So what can you do? Well, the best option is probably to use server-side rendering and hydration. That makes your website basically static, but then enhances it as JavaScript loads. That makes you less reliant on JavaScript, and it makes it actually the user experience better, because normally these pages are serving a lot faster. And as HTML is streamed and renders as it comes in, it basically is a faster user experience in most cases. If you have a website where you know when the content changes, like my own blog, it only changes when I post a new blog post or when I edit an existing one. Then you can also pre-render. So server-side rendering basically creates the HTML every single time I make a request. But if the data stays the same until I deploy a new thing or add new content, then I can use these moments to generate the HTML and upload the static HTML. That makes my hosting a little easier in most cases and actually gives you the same result as server-side rendering with just less resources needed. You can also use a workaround that we call dynamic rendering. Now, what is dynamic rendering? Dynamic rendering fundamentally means that you serve. So let's say like you are an agency and you have built this front end and all the front end developers leave, and you basically have to deal with the fact that the application doesn't show up in search results. What can you do without changing the entire front end to server-side rendering or pre-rendering? Well, you can configure your server to look at the user agent, because the crawlers tell you that they are crawlers. So you basically have a list of crawlers that you know don't execute JavaScript. And then when they request it, you don't just send them the full-blown JavaScript client-side app. You basically send that into a headless browser of some sort, and then basically render it into static HTML and serve that static HTML. That's one way of doing it. The problem there is it's basically a workaround. It's not really good. It's first things first. You shouldn't be building workarounds for search engines, and that's unfortunate that we have to, at this point sometimes. Also, it doesn't give you the user benefits. Like, the user still gets the client-side rendered application. If you would invest in a server-side rendered application or pre-rendering, you would get static HTML, which is usually faster. If you still want to do this, we have documentation, we have a code lab, and a video on this, if you want to check that out. There's plenty of solutions to do this. There's Rendertron, there's Puppeteer, there's Puppeteer if you want to build it yourself, and there's paid services as well that allow you to run this basically as a turnkey solution. All right, wrapping it up real quick. We have two fantastic testing tools that you should definitely use. The mobile-friendly test also gives you JavaScript errors and other things, so definitely that should be your first line of defense. Use that one, the mobile-friendly test, plug in any URL. It can be an ngrok URL or local tunnel or whatever you use in your development setup to get like a publicly reachable version of that. You just plug it in there and you see what Googlebot sees. And you see like JavaScript errors and fetch errors and stuff like that. Search Console is a more proactive reporting tool. It basically monitors your entire site, and it will email you if there's a problem. And it gives you more documentation and stuff as well, so it's easier to fix these problems. If you can make the investment in server-side rendering or pre-rendering or whatever it's called these days, hybrid rendering, isomorphic rendering, definitely look into it because it's usually worth the investment. Also, use semantic HTML. It's not just good for crawlers, it's also good for accessibility and basically all user needs. We have many, many guides that explain this in much more detail. We have the JavaScript SEO videos on the YouTube channel. We also have Webmaster Office Hours. We basically have a hangout that you can join and ask us questions. You can also submit the questions up front, and then we record these so you can see the answers afterwards if we have answered the question. If you have JavaScript-specific issues, there's also a mailing list that you can join to discuss with other people who might have seen the issue before. We have a blog, and we are on Twitter. So please, 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 if you have any problems, reach out. We're not doing Q&A on stage, but I'm pretty much around all day, so please just join me. I'm going to be sitting somewhere here. Just join me, talk to me, ask me your questions. I'm happy to help. Thank you very much. Still 40 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Martin. Now, Martin is going to be around, as he says, for the rest of the day if you've got questions for him. But he's also going to be at a technical SEO AMA where you can, I guess, ask him anything. That's happening in South Melbourne, 6 o'clock tonight. If you jump on Eventbrite and search for SEO AMA, I should imagine it's the only one happening tonight. We got a couple of great talks happening for the next little while, next 40 minutes. We've got, in this room, Sunny's here talking about reactive forms, and in the Iron Man room, Yasser is talking about AI with TensorFlow. So make your decisions, and we'll get started in another minute.